everyone. My name is Melody Jones Poynton.
And I'm the Reverend Thomas de Vermouth.
And we are excited to walk the Sunrise Road together today.
The Sunrise Road podcast is a podcast with conversations that connect and weave hope into the fabric of our shared lives.
Thank you for joining us. And here's this week's conversation. Our guest for this morning is Reverend Eduardo Buson, and he is the chaplain at Nebraska Wesleyan University, a place near and dear to my family's heart. Many of you know that my husband is very active in the Wesleyan community, and we have really enjoyed our involvement and working with Eduardo, who is you're the chaplain, the Nebraska Wesleyan campus chaplain. Spiritual director. What's your official title, Eduardo?
University minister.
University minister, as I said. Eduardo is also working with the Nebraska Wesleyan campus on Justice in Action. And so we work together in that regard. And welcome, Eduardo. We're so happy that you're here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And our other guest is Pastor Liz, the Reverend Liz Kosher, who is with us this morning. She is the interim minister at the UNL Lutheran Center here in town, where I'm connected to as a government council member. And I'm very excited to be here, to have you here with us this morning, Liz.
Thank you so much. It's great to be on the podcast.
So we have been talking about evangelism. And we are sort of asking everyone, all of our guests, what a definition of evangelism is. And so far, we've found that it differs. It's not it's your own personal definition. So there's no right or wrong. I don't know, Liz or Eduardo, who wants to go first, but what do you think evangelism is today?
I'll go. So for me, I when I went to college, I was part of a campus ministry that did evangelism a couple of times a week. That was the core of it. So for those 4 years, I was immersed in sharing faith. It was mostly verbally. But since those days to today, I still understand that sharing the gospel is very important. But I think the method is the method is as important as the message. And I think because the method shows the message, right? Or embodies the message, incarnates the message, to use a fancy evangelist theological word. So just to finish my rambling, for me, the Great Commandment is essential in my life, doctrinally and in practice. So for me, to share my faith means to ways in which I show love to God, or I show God that I love God, but also ways in which I love others. And I think that people respond much better by seeing that kindness, that compassion towards other people, than me having the 4 spiritual laws or whatever it is that the kids these days do. So evangelism is to live out loud the Great Commandment.
That's good.
And that's it.
Good. Good. It's perfect. What about for you, Liz?
Thanks, Eduardo. That is a difficult theological message to follow. So, when we were preparing for this podcast, I took very seriously the instruction from Pastor Melody to not prepare. But I did see, of course, that the topic was evangelism, and that's been just a nagging little kind of thorn in my pastoral identity since my since my seminary days, because I am ordained in the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And for us, we do all the other three letters of that acronym well. We know what it means to be Lutheran. We know what it, as much as one can. We know what it means to be church and to be Christ followers. And we take seriously that we're called to public witness in our society, which embodies that America. But it's that evangelical that we often brush against or kind of conveniently ignore. And I see that in my campus ministry setting at UNL as far as when we share the gospel. It goes back to just what Pastor Eduardo said, which was that the method is as important as the message. And I think my community here often defines our evangelism kind of in counter to what we see elsewhere on campus. So we see other Christian groups on campus that come forward with very strong messages of Christianity being synonymous with hateful messages or with messages of exclusion or of condemnation. And so for my community here, evangelism sometimes means defining ourselves by what we're not. And there's an important voice for that. There's a needed voice to be here in the community and say, no, God is love for each and every person, no exceptions. But my job is to then challenge our community to start living out the gospel by who we are and to bring forth that positive message. And we're still learning. I'll be very honest. We're still learning how to do that because we have it's like we have such a beautiful community here and we share such gracious love. We want everyone to experience it. But we don't believe that you have to come through our particular doors in order to experience it. So we are still navigating what evangelism means by being proactive with sharing the gospel into our community while also being true to our theological identity, which is one of grace and one of accompaniment rather than one of conflict. I'll leave it there for now.
I really appreciate both of your thoughts. And one of the things that strikes me as different about your communities, even though you both work on campuses and in connection with college students, is that I know that Eduardo is university minister for the entire community, regardless of faith, tradition, or belief. And Liz, your community is very distinctly working within a Christian context. But one of the things that I think in the church that we talk about, like in the traditional parish, is we think about evangelism as a way to membership. And so I have to tell you, I'm a little bit jealous. I have a little bit of envy going on here, holy envy, because I think that in your particular contexts, membership doesn't mean the same as it does in the parish. So evangelism is not a way to boost attendance. Is that true? Or can I continue with my envy? Or, am I wrong? Is it not really right?
Well, I mean, I have the best job in the world. So, and I think if I didn't have my job, I would want Liz's job. By that I mean being on a public campus, working with students. So yeah, please be envious. Campus ministries, we're funded. The difference between a campus ministry and a local church is that the local church is funded by its members, and campus ministry is not funded by its members. It's funded by outside sources, and they have expectations. So to a degree, if I have 5 people involved in my campus ministry that generates an excitement in funders that is different than if I had 30 or 50 or however many. So there's a pressure on having more bodies on the seats, I guess. We don't have pews or benches. So there is still that. But I think for me, evangelism, I don't evangelize to get people into heaven. I evangelize to have folks experience the love of God. For me, that's more important. And then what happens after this life, that's up to God. So I'm not concerned like some of the other groups. I'm not concerned about saving folks. Theologically, that's a disaster. We don't save anyone. The Holy Spirit does that. But anyway, I don't evangelize to save folks. I evangelize so people can know the love of God in this life. And if that turns into someone that joins our programs, then that is great. Often, I don't fill my pews or my seats with evangelism. I just invite people. I say, hey, come to worship. Hey, come to a Bible study. That is not evangelism. From my perspective, evangelism is, as I said, it's through words and action, extend the love of God so others might experience it. So I think that there's a difference between bringing people to church and evangelism.
I experience similar to what Eduardo experiences, and like, yes, you absolutely should be envious of the spaces in which we get to serve. But Melody, like you were saying, in your experience, a church's acting out of evangelism is often for the sake of inward focus and for bringing people into membership, bringing people into the community, which is a beautiful thing, but also can be more of a self-serving moment. And I will say my experience is that my students have brought that way of thinking from whatever churches they have come into. And so while we don't have an official membership or a roster, we do note where attendance is, and if there's a perception that attendance is down, that causes anxiety and causes the same kinds of conversations that I think many of our intergenerational congregations are having. It becomes how do we attract more people, and evangelism then becomes an inward focused thing, and it's a tough walk, because I fully believe that what we are doing here in this space is life-giving, and that students who come experience relationship, they experience grace, they experience this beautifully radical love of God in community when they come here. But we also occasionally worry about bringing people in for the sake of us being able to continue the way that we have been continuing. Mm-hmm. And I think true evangelism, which is outward focused, which is bringing what we're doing inside the community out, that's risky. That's really risky, because it's going to change the fabric of our community. It's going to change what we have to offer, what resources we have. It's going to change that. And I have learned that while I think in general campus ministry is a little less risk averse than intergenerational congregations, there still is a fear in that unknown. And our job as leaders in these communities is to imagine for them what a new future could look like. but it's hard for us. I won't speak for Eduardo, but for me, I am also learning how to embrace that risk and learning what that means for the community that I am serving, or the church, the wide church that I am serving, to change. And so outward evangelism challenges us in that way.
Mm. I want to pick that up a little bit more. I really love what you both are saying. And thank you for your definitions in kind of clarifying what for you evangelism is and is not. I think that's really helpful to say why of our evangelism, that it's not about filling seats, that it's not about getting people to heaven. This is not why. The most obvious answer is why, because we're told to do it. That's one thing. But the why that I heard you both say is so people can feel the love of God, so that God is love for every person. I heard you both say that in different ways, and I really, really love that as a foundation of evangelism. Now, I would like to hear more about that line of thought that you, Liz, were just kind of starting on, the risk, because not just the goal and the why of evangelism, but the how. Because I mean, evangelize is a verb. It's an action verb, and so I'm kind of curious to pick your brains, or if you can share a little bit about risky things that you and your community have done together, where you got a sense of like you put this into action, that this God is love for every person.
So I think for my community here on campus, a very tangible risk that we took, and I'll say I've only been in this community about 6 months, so I'm going to brag on a beautiful moment that my community did before I got here. But one thing that we did about 2 years ago was become a Reconciling in Christ designated church, faith community. We in our particular denomination, we call that the RIC, Reconciling in Christ designation. And what this means in the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, my denomination, is that we have done the work and are an officially designated open and affirming congregation, particularly with regards to the LGBTQIA+ community. So we have a statement that we wrote as a community. The statement is right in front of our sanctuary doors, and it explicitly says we welcome all people and affirm the dignity of all people, regardless of their sexuality or gender identity or race. And it's an explicit statement affirming the LGBTQIA+ community, as well as an anti-racism statement. And I know that when we went through this process to get this designated stamp of approval, or this designated official piece of our identity, I know it was a risk, because much like Eduardo, we also are dependent on funding beyond the students in our pews, or that we see every Sunday or Wednesday. And so the risk was knowing that this decision was going to potentially limit some of our funding, or cause some of our givers to no longer want to give to our ministry, and that was going to change things. And as I understood it, when they went through this process, they didn't exactly know what this was going to mean. They didn't know, is this going to, and I believe Thomas was on the board at the time, so perhaps you can speak more to this also. But it was a risk, and we're not the only congregation to go through something like this. But the risk was worth it, because we as a community and the leadership here decided that the priority had to be living out the gospel as we feel called to, even if it was not the most financially wise decision. I don't know, Thomas, you were around. Do you remember those conversations?
I certainly do. Yeah. And what I particularly liked about the way the Lutheran Center approached that topic was the decision not to start it as a top-down decision. That the leadership or the council said, let's do this, let's make that statement. but it involved conversations of the constituents or who are part of the community who talked about, well, what would that look like, and how are we going to live that out, and how can we how would we respond if we are in a setting and bigotry is happening in this room, and so that was first in that sense, and the statement then was kind of like, yes, I think we are ready to put that on our door and be official about that.
And what this has meant then is when I came into the community, I think it was like my first week here, I had students who came up to me who said, "Hey, Pastor, we're RIC. We're trying to figure out biblically what this means. Like biblically, how do we back up this RIC identity? Can you help us?" And I was like, "This is why you should be envious." That kind of request your first week as pastor is just like, you're like, "Yes, absolutely. Let's have this Bible study. Let's have this forum. Let's have these conversations." And they were really fruitful, and they were really authentic. They came from a place of students really wanting to be able to evangelize and be outside of this space, working in other spaces of campus, and be able to say, "Here is why my church supports trans rights or gay rights. Like, here is why, given our scripture." It also meant that then come this spring, when the Nebraska legislative session began, we hosted a Valentine's Day Love Your Neighbor in Action letter writing moment. Some folks from Civic Nebraska came to our church and gave kind of a tutorial on how bills become laws and what bills are up right now, and here's how you can find your representative, and here's what effective letter writing looks like. And then we made Valentine's cards for our representatives, and gave students the opportunity, if they wanted to express their beliefs, live out their faith in action. And we were able to live into that because the work had been done, exactly like Thomas said, from within the community before. It gave us space to really be creative with that and do some programs that hadn't been done before. Bible studies had been done before, but to my knowledge, a letter writing event had not.
What about for you, Eduardo? What things do you see at Wesleyan that your community, and again, your context is a little bit different, and I know from previous conversations that it's really important to you and to the values of the university that you are there for everybody who is associated with Wesleyan, including staff and students, regardless of their faith background. So what does that look like for your community to be taking risks for evangelism?
Well, I think that, evangelism, which is sharing the gospel, that is the most risky part, because I don't evangelize for Christians. I share the gospel for those who have been marginalized or de-churched, or whichever terms we are using right now. So my whenever I reach out to campus, every week I try to send an email. It's a devotional email, but it's meant to be non-sectarian. But if you're a Christian and you read those, you're like, oh yeah, Jesus. And if you're Jewish, you go, oh yeah, Torah. Kind of like trying to incorporate these very universal values that, regardless, point out to the love of God. But something very specific that we've done that I thought it was risky. On the a couple of years ago, well, I don't know, before the pandemic, that was what, 10 years ago. We had a Trans Day of Remembrance, and Pride Alliance led that. and they wanted they invited me, and I said, I would love to do that. And as we're planning, we thought, why don't we have an event in which we remember all the trans victims that have suffered violence because of being trans, and then have a candlelight walk that leads to the chapel, and in there we pray. So we did that, and it was really powerful. It was one of my favorite things to do, because all these people who have been rejected by the church, or one way or another, or not even rejected, that they don't feel that they fit in the church. After the event at Conference Center, we walked to the chapel. There were about 30 people there. I shared a super short message, and then I prayed for those who wanted to be prayed over, and everyone wanted to be prayed over. And there was, it was very emotional. And then afterwards, there were folks who were telling me, I never even thought that I will feel loved by a pastor, or feel accepted, or even being in a sacred space like our chapel is. And I say that was risky, because there are folks on campus who are very conservative. It's not the majority; it's very much the minority. But they have a voice. They have a loud voice, like everyone else. But love is risky. Whenever we choose to love someone, we make ourselves very vulnerable, and that's a risk that we take. So every time I think that God's love overflows from our heart into someone else's heart, that's a very risky business. I'm thinking going to the farmers market in the Haymarket, and there are all these homeless folks, and not ignoring them, actually spending 5 minutes talking to them, even if I don't have any cash to give. That's risky. But it's again, it's an overflowing of God's love from our hearts into the hearts of someone else. So anyway, that's but that's one example. The visual that we held, in ways in which I felt that, oh my gosh, people are going to talk about this.
I think one thing that I hear from you all, and again, a little bit of holy envy here, is that I think the challenge for us with evangelism within the Christian community context is to live out that we believe this is a message for all people, and to recognize that within our Christian communities, there are people who either don't feel comfortable, or who have been left out by society, by us, by the church traditions over time. And I think that that's a challenge to all of us. Within the most church communities that I know of, most pastors would say, we too have folks for whom this conversation would be uncomfortable, and we have folks for whom this conversation would be a further, who we are. But I think that one thing that I really want to take away for everyone is that, God's love is for all people, and that we get to be the messengers of that. And in a previous episode, I asked, why do evangelism anyway? Because, if I'm not trying to get more people in the pews, if I'm not trying to grow a mega church, which, then why do evangelism? And I think what you both have shared today for me is kind of gets me back on the evangelism bandwagon. And it's because there are people who need to know that God loves them. And if I'm that messenger, that's an evangelism that I can celebrate and get behind. Because I don't know anymore. I really struggle to say, I need to go out and share the gospel so that people can come to my community. Our community is great. And I love Eastridge Presbyterian Church. I love a lot of what we're doing. So I want to thank you both for your time. I know that, we've got other commitments here, but you both are such a blessing to our community and to the communities in which you serve. We'll have you both on again individually. I just really am thankful for this conversation that you have been able to offer for us today, and the challenges and the risks that will bring us a little bit out of our understanding of evangelism. So thank you both.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a joy to get to talk about such a fun subject with such wonderful people and leaders. So it's good to see you all via the Zoom podcast world. And I look forward to getting to continue these conversations.
Methodists and Presbyterians and Lutherans. Oh my.
Oh my.
That's how the world gets changed.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sunrise Road podcast. Our podcast is hosted by me, Thomas Dummermuth.
And me, Melody Jones-Poynton. And it is edited by Vince Rule.
The Sunrise Road podcast is a ministry of Eastridge Presbyterian Church. Please like and subscribe and leave a review.